So Steve Yzerman's Detroit Red Wings are next in the Summer Report series. Let's take a look at what the Detroit Red Wings look like heading into next season. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Let's take a look at what could be for the Detroit Red Wings this season. There is potential for the Detroit Red Wings this season. We saw them draft a guy like Moritz Seider, who they probably went a little bit off the board for that. They bring in Steve Yzerman. They bring in Valtteri Filppula as some depth down the middle. I like what the Detroit Red Wings are doing. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. So the Detroit Red Wings currently in, I would say, maybe the middle part of a rebuild here in Detroit. They have a little less than $6 million in cap space, just a hair over $5 million. And you have some pretty big contracts coming off the board next year. Let's take a look right away. You got Mike Green's almost $5.5 million coming off the books next season. You have Jonathan Ericsson's a little over $4 million coming off the books, as well as Trevor Daley, who at this point probably isn't worth much. He's making over $3 million for the Detroit Red Wings. And Jimmy Howard's $4 million, who they just re-signed, but that's a little bit high. That is a lot of money for the Detroit Red Wings to possibly play with next season. So, but that's going to be brought back. Unfortunately, they're going to have to reel in a little bit of that cap space because they have some guys to re-sign. Guys like Anthony Mantha, Andreas Athanasiou, and Tyler Bertuzzi. So this is definitely, they're going to have to figure out what they have here. Steve Yzerman's going to evaluate these guys, see what he has in these players. And you have to wonder, if Ken Holland was still the general manager of the Detroit Red Wings, I would say that Anthony Mantha could be on the trade block and move. But I think Steve Yzerman's going to wait to see what this team looks like. He's going to see if he likes Anthony Mantha, and he'll decide probably by the deadline what he has to do with Mantha. Is he going to keep him? Is he going to trade him? I would say they're going to keep him, but who knows what Steve Yzerman is thinking right now in terms of Anthony Mantha. So with that, they also have all their first three rounds of picks. And they also have the Washington Capitals second round pick and the San Jose Sharks third round pick from the Gustav Nyquist trade. So Detroit definitely has some draft picks. They added a couple here and there. And again, there's a rebuilding team. So if we saw a guy like Mike Green or Jonathan Ericsson or Jimmy Howard move to the deadline next year, they could bring in a couple more draft picks to stockpile for Steve Yzerman to work with at the draft next year in 2020. So Detroit definitely has some, upward momentum. Dylan Larkin, you have to assume, could be one of the guys in the running for captaincy this fall. And there's been a report recently that he is ready for that role. We'll see what happens with the Detroit Red Wings. Steve Yzerman might wait till next season to figure out a captain, or he may want to get a captain right away here. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But taking a look at the Detroit Red Wings. So you have Tyler Bertuzzi, Anthony Mantha, and Dylan Larkin. So if you just read the names that are going to be free agents next year, you have Tyler Bertuzzi and Anthony Mantha. So the top two wingers for this Detroit Red Wings team that you could argue will be free agents next year. So some of that money will indeed be spent on these top players for the Detroit Red Wings. Dylan Larkin, like we specified, is one of the better players, especially on the Detroit Red Wings. He's been, he was supposed to be a superstar when he came in from Michigan. He may not have lived up to that hype, but he is nonetheless a really good player. But they're going to be expecting a little bit more from him, especially Steve Yzerman. He wants that top center that he really believes in, and Dylan Larkin's going to have to prove that this year. Tyler Bertuzzi, he can score goals. He's a little bit of a grinder. Kind of reminds me of a Brad Marchand in a way. And who knows? This could be a good direction here for the Detroit Red Wings with a guy like Bertuzzi. And Mantha, I've always loved Anthony Mantha. Back last year when Ken Holland had him as a possible trade piece, I wanted the Islanders to be in on Anthony Mantha. I think he would have fit in well with the Islanders. It's kind of repetitious though with a guy like Anders Lee, but nonetheless, Anthony Mantha has a lot of scoring potential, and he could be a very sought-after piece at next year's trade deadline. Now, that all depends on where the Detroit Red Wings finish, but we'll have to take a look at that in a couple of minutes. So, and take a look at the second line: Andreas Athanasiou, Franz Nielsen, and Filip Zadina. So Zadina, let's get the elephant out of the room. Zadina, he was going to put the puck in all these teams' nets in front of him last year. Spent a lot of time in the American Hockey League, so really didn't make the NHL right away. Struggled a little bit. And this is his year to really prove things. He's going to be in the top six. Steve Yzerman has him in the top six, so he has to take advantage of this opportunity. New ownership, turn the leaf for Zadina. He needs to get things going this year. Franz Nielsen, always loved Franz Nielsen. I don't think he's the player that he used to be, but nonetheless, the lack of center depth on this team kind of forces him into the second line role. And that could end up being switched with the third line center, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Andreas Athanasiou, he's also up for a contract. I'm really hoping for a breakout season for Athanasiou. He really needs to get things going, and this could be the year for Athanasiou. And then taking a look at the third line, so you have some different names here, some rookies, some veterans. You have Taro Hirose, Valtteri Filppula, and Michael Rasmussen. So Michael Rasmussen is probably the name I like most out of this group. Michael Rasmussen, they were expecting a decent amount from him. He can play center, so this shows a little bit of center depth for this team, but I think he struggled a little bit down the middle, so they're moving him to the wing. May not be the best for his potential in the future. We've seen what happens when you kind of push guys to the wing and stunt their growth at center. You saw that with Galchenyuk. This could be another situation that they are developing here with Michael Rasmussen. Valtteri Filppula, I believe, is a really good third-line center, especially with the New York Islanders last season. He had a really good season with the Islanders. He still has the skill. He still has a decent amount of speed, and he's a very elusive player. I think that's a great pickup for Steve Yzerman and the Detroit Red Wings. Taro Hirose, I don't know too much about him. He has a really good name, but besides that, the Detroit Red Wings third line is mediocre, and they could either be a really big and make big impact for this team, or they kind of just, they're just another third line that's a little bit weaker, comparable to other teams in the NHL. And then the fourth line, this is an expensive fourth line. You have Justin Abdelkader, Luke Glendening down the middle, and Darren Helm. Honestly, I don't really like any of those guys. I think the best guy out of that is Luke Glendening, and even him, not too sure how much I like him. These are just older players that are being paid way too much, and they kind of have to fill out the roster. That's a tough fourth line for the Detroit Red Wings, and that's where the lack of depth kind of concerns me with the Red Wings, because you lose a guy in that top 6 or top 9, and one of these guys moves up in the lineup. I don't like that at all for the Red Wings. You could tell there's a rebuilding team. So then you have on the defensive side of things, you have on your top pair, Danny DeKeyser and Mike Green. I think Danny DeKeyser is a little bit overrated. I don't think he's the player that everybody hopes he would be with the Red Wings. Obviously, he's a top 2 defenseman on this team, top 4 defenseman in some other teams, but I don't know. I think he's more of a top 6 defenseman at this point. But this is why I think Steve Yzerman went off the board and drafted Moritz Seider, because he needs some defensive help. And then looking at Mike Green, he's a good veteran guy. They could maybe get some pieces for him at the trade deadline. But besides that, Mike Green on this defense, there's really not much he can do. He's a really good offensive defenseman, but this team it lacks depth. He's going to have a hard time keeping up points, and with his age, how much more, you can't have him liable for everything defense for this team, because it's a mess. And then you have Jonathan Ericsson and Filip Hronek. Filip Hronek could end up being a top 4 defenseman for this team. I think he's going to end up being more of a top 6 defenseman. But nonetheless, he's a good player, and they're going to probably need him to step up this year. They don't really have too much depth on the defensive side, so there's a great opportunity for him to move things up. Jonathan Erickson, let's not even talk about Erickson. I don't like him. He's an older player. He's getting paid way too much. He's a good depth defenseman if you need him, but playing in the top four definitely concerns me for the Detroit Red Wings. And taking a look at the third pairing, you have Madison Bowey and Trevor Daley. Now, I actually like Madison Bowey. Maybe it's a little bit biased. He was a Hershey Bear. I've seen him play. He's a pretty good player. Didn't work out too well with the Washington Capitals. It seems like they were going well, but things just didn't work out. And then Trevor Daley, overpaid, don't like him. Let's move on. Take a look at the goaltending. You have Jimmy Howard and Jonathan Bernier. So Bernier turned things around for the Detroit Red Wings last year, and obviously Jimmy Howard getting older. They may need a guy to play more minutes, play more games. Jonathan Bernier is going to be playing pretty much the same amount of games, if not more games, this year for the Red Wings. And then injuries, the one guy that's off the list right now is Evgeny Svechnikov, not Andrei Svechnikov, Evgeny. He has not turned out the way that Detroit hoped he would become with that first-round pick, but he's going to have a chance. He's injured. Not a great start for Svechnikov, but he's going to have a spot in the lineup more than likely. I think this offense is pretty weak. He could easily get a spot in there if he was ready for that role. So let me know what you guys think of the Detroit Red Wings. I'd love to say that this is a team that could maybe make the wild card, but in all honesty and reality, I just don't know how good of a team the Red Wings are right now. They're really not a playoff team right now. They don't have the depth. They really don't have the group up front. I like Dylan Larkin and Anthony Mantha, but even anything after that kind of concerns me. Tyler Bertuzzi on the first line, he's a good player. He could become a player like Marchand, but I don't know. Besides that top line, things are a little bit weak. I do like Phil Blott on the third line. I think that helps out, but it's just not enough. That fourth line, in my opinion, is an American Hockey League line. It's a brutal line. Some of those players in the defensive system, make me cringe when I see how much money they're getting paid and really the product that they're putting on the ice for that. It doesn't make sense. So let me know what you guys think of the Detroit Red Wings. They're obviously building in the right direction. I like what the Red Wings are doing. Steve Yzerman being in there is definitely going to, let's cross our fingers, hopefully helps the situation in Detroit. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Check out our Instagram, @GoalLineHockey as well. Check out our playlist on the rest of this Summer Report series. Take a look at all 31 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.